Okay, the dreaded B-Series ignition barrel. So as you can see, I've got an ignition barrel pulled apart here. I'm about to reassemble this one so I can get it back into the car. This one had popped off in the car by the previous owner. I'm about to put it back together. All the parts are there, which is good. Now, one of the main things with these, when they do go, is you'll see inside this whole thing here, there's little tabs. I'm not sure. This tab here, that one, and I think this one as well, this lump here. These can break off. So what happens is when they break off and you turn your key won't spring back. So those are just little stoppers for this little spring, which is in this piece here. You'll see that spring inside there, the coiled up piece of metal, just in there. Not these little tiny ones on the edges, the one in the shaft. There's a spring in there, and that spring catches on those lips. So when you turn your key to the start position, that spring returns your key. So a common thing is they snap off, so you'll have no return. And also, the way they're made from factory is just not a great design. So you have all your wiring here has some contacts on the back, and you have this brass plate, or it could be copper, whatever it is, sits inside the housing and allows that to, you'll see there's some raised contacts on there. Those contacts slide onto the back of this, and when you turn your key, it rotates to give this the correct touches, correct contacts, so the wires can start your car. So they just pop apart because of the way they're designed. But if you're lucky and you don't have any broken tabs, you can just put it all back together as it was and happy days. So that's what we're going to do. These are the parts that are inside it. There's not really much to it, but these things here are the most important things, these little ball bearings, just because they're so small. Usually when the back pops off, these are going to go flying down in the footwell somewhere. And if you want to put it back together, you need both of those. I've lost them a couple of times before, lost one, but you just got to make sure you find all the parts. So you need the two ball bearings. There's a larger spring here. You need this plastic piece, which has a spring that sits in each of these holes on the outer edge. Now the spring inside, that won't come out, that's generally always in there, and these ones generally stay in there too. They do have some grease on them, so it helps hold those in there. And then lastly, there's this little tiny spring. It's a little small one, but quite long, and the contact plate itself. Now the ball bearings are designed to sit in the two holes on the outside of this piece here, this plastic piece. So those little holes there, that one and that one, is where the ball bearings sit in the housing. So the ball bearings will sit in there. This plastic piece will sit down on those ball bearings, and those ball bearings will allow this to rotate inside when you turn the key. Okay, I've just stood the column up and moved it so we can see what we're doing. Now what turns that plastic piece, this one, is there's a little keyway on the inside. So as you can see on that inner hole, there's a keyway, and that keyway slides over the keyway, or that little shaft in the middle there, which turns. I'll turn the key. You can see that shaft turning when I turn the key. So that turns the plastic assembly inside the housing. So when you're reassembling it, you just got to make sure you get that keyway over the keyway in the middle. So it'll sit over there, and it will lock in when you get it in the correct spot. So you just sit it over and spin it, and that's where it's slid in. So it's slid in there, that's where it goes. Now the issue is it doesn't just sit in nicely like that. The problem is there needs to be a spring underneath it, which is always pushing against to push it all out. So it's a whole assembly that needs to be put back together and compressed to hold it all together. It's not a hard job, as long as everything's back in the right spot. It'll work as normal. So I'll show you where the bits go, and hopefully you'll be able to get yours sorted and at least get you back on the road if you're having this same issue. Now when you're doing this in the car, it's best to drop the steering column, take the 4 10mm bolts out that hold it up, drop the steering column, and that will allow you to rotate the column so that this part is facing up, because you need to sit the ball bearings inside. If you have the ignition on the side where it would normally sit, you'll never get the ball bearings in to sit where they need to be. So you really need to rotate the whole column. So what I've done is I've turned the key into the off position, so we're starting from scratch. So first thing to do is just dummy fit this plastic piece again, and find where it's got to be sitting. If you've done a few of these, you'll know exactly what to do, and you probably won't have to do this step, but you probably wouldn't even be watching this, but yeah. So it sits there. So as you can see, the ball bearings need to sit under this hole here and this hole here. And you'll see when I remove this plate, there's two little slots in the housing. So the two ball bearings, one needs to sit in this slot and one needs to sit in this slot. So first thing you need to do is get one ball bearing. I've just got a little screwdriver, magnetic one, and just sit it in that grease hole, just there, or grease pot. I'm gonna turn this, try and get some more light on it, like that. I'll get the second one, and put that in the opposite slot, just there. So as you can see, the two ball bearings are sitting where they need to sit. Now it's obviously going to be a bit finicky doing it in the car, but you get the gist of how it goes back together. So now that you've got that in, this plastic piece needs to sit over the top of those, but you need to get that long skinny spring inside this shaft. So you can either slide the spring directly into the shaft, this little one, into there, but what I like to do is sit it onto this one. That way I know it's in place where it needs to go and it's not going to pop off. Then you need to put this in and slide it down. And remember, that spring's going to have tension on it. So once you get it in there, you're going to have to hold it the whole time. So it's going to be pretty hard for me to do this with one hand, but we'll see how we go. So now I'm going to slide this plastic piece over that spring and push it down. Trying to line up these dots with the ball bearings. And it should go in where it sits. Just like that. So that's it, that's under the spring tension now. Now the next thing to do is get this spring, the fatter one, slid onto the back of this shaft. So I'm going to do that. Just like that. And I've had to keep pressure on that plastic piece because remember that's got a spring under it as well. So now lastly, I need to slide this copper contact piece over the top of that. So I'll put that on and I'll show you how that looks. Just like that. So you can see now that's got the spring underneath and there's tension on that. So now the last thing to do is slide on your contacts, the plug itself, without all of this stuff popping out. So I've just pulled it all apart again, just to show you before I put the back piece on. There's a little notch in this piece here. You'll see there, that whole recess, just there. So that's designed so that this sits in the right position when you put it back together. So that little recess just sits over this notch here on the housing, just there. So as long as that little notch sits in here, your contacts will all be in the right position and it should work as normal. And also, before you go putting this back on, to save yourself any headaches, just make sure that all of these tabs that you've folded out, there's 4 of them. So just grab yourself some needle nose pliers and just pinch it ever so slightly on the 4 tabs to stop this from getting caught when you go to put it back in. Otherwise, yeah, you've got the spring tension there and it can be a bit of a headache if this isn't going to clip in. So I'll reassemble all that how it was, make sure the ball bearings are where they need to be, and I'll clip this on and I'll show you how it all sits. So that's it all back together. That's under spring tension. If I let my finger off that, it's going to all pop out. But all that holds it back in, and this is the issue that it has in the first place, is there's little tabs on the outside. I'll bend one over to hold it in, just so I can take my hand off it and then I'll show you. Okay, so it's all back together there. I've got one tab folded over. So these little tabs here, or this whole aluminium housing on the outside here, the inner one, is very thin. And all they do is fold 4 little tabs over to hold this plastic piece in place. 1, 2, 3, and there's one under the wiring. So what happens, I think, over time when you turn your key, these tabs just eventually fold back out and it's just not enough to hold this in and it just pops out. So long as those tabs on the inside haven't broken off, you can put it all back together like this, and this is exactly how it was from factory. It's not dodgy, it's just putting it back together. So when you fold these back over, you want to push down on this, so you're pushing on all that spring tension to keep it all tight and closed together. So what I do is I put the screwdriver in here in between the 2 housings and just use it as a lever and just pry it down. So I'll put the camera down and then I'll show you them all folded over and it all back together. And there it is. As you can see, that's all in there securely now. I've folded the tabs over and I've pushed this down to keep the tension on the springs as I've folded them over. So it's nice and secure, nice and tight. Bit dodgy because somebody's been in here before, obviously, and tried to fix it, but yeah, it's still holding. So that's pretty much it. It's all good. I'm gonna fold these tabs over just a bit more, just so I'm happy with them. But yeah, that's all there is to it. Hopefully that's helped someone out. If the tabs on the inside aren't broken, happy days. The only issue is if they are broken, your key just won't spring back when you start the car. But it's not going to stop you from being able to get it back together and get your car moving again. So yeah, hopefully that's helped someone out. Cheers.